All right, hello. Today we're going to be reading Evelyn Underhill, A Mysticism, Studying the Nature and Development of Spiritual Consciousness. And right there is the ocean. Isn't that great? There's the sun, and I'm in a big cloud of fog. So when I got a good walk in, I was thinking maybe it would clear up because it was clear at the bottom, but whatever. So Evelyn Underhill, this is from 1910. Welcome. Right now we're looking at the second half of this book called The Mystic Way, and it's like there's the purgation and then the illuminated self, but you know, I always say just welcome. Start right here, and always after you can go to the beginning of this playlist. There's a playlist, and I just selected the option last night to make it a podcast, so we'll see if that will. If you're on the podcast and you're listening to this, you can always come over and see. Usually there's like a beautiful view of the ocean or wherever I am in nature. I try to read this in nature unless it's absolutely raining, which it hardly does here. I'm in Southern California, and so sometimes I'm indoors. But anyway, I just go wherever I am so I can bring you this book because I was going to read it by myself. She inspired C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Charles Williams. Really liked Evelyn Underhill, and he was part of the group called the Inklings, and that's what Tolkien was a part of that in Oxford. They used to meet at the Eagle and Child pub. I've been there a few times, and at least twice, I think three times. I know people live there, but so that's about it. She was before them. Anyway, she's a beautiful, mystic, intellectual woman that's head and heart, you know. I love her. And so I'm really glad she came into our lives. So let's start. We're on chapter 5, Voices and Visions. And what I always do on this part is I do this, so you can take a screenshot of this first, but I'm going to read it. It's an outline of what she's going to be talking about in this chapter. Okay, so it's called, she says, this is a controversial subject, rationalism and orthodoxy, both extreme in their conclusions, literal interpretation, fatal to vision. Every kind of automatism is found in the mystic life, cannot be neglected by its investigators. Visions may often be merely subjective, but sometimes embody transcendental perceptions. Some test necessary. Real mystic vision enhances life. Most visionary activity, mixed in type, is always symbolic in character, a form of artistic expression. Automatisms, characteristic of all creative genius. I think it's like automatic, inspiration maybe, or I don't know. She'll explain it. I'm a psychologist in my day job, have been for over 20 years. So anyway, but I don't have to explain myself. Sometimes I haven't read words in a while, and I got a concussion a few weeks ago. So my brain has just been turned off lately because I've been more in my heart. Anyway, mystic visions and voices are helps to transcendence, related to life, Delacroix, audition, the simplest form of automatism. Okay, so when you hear things automatically in your ears, but it's not because you're insane, you're actually just... Anyway, she'll talk about it. 3 kinds of auditions: the intellectual word, Madame Guyon, distinct interior words, Saint Teresa of Avila, False auditions, St. John of the Cross talks about that a lot. That's what I've been reading lately. I've been reading The Ascent of Mount Carmel, and it's so good on this. I was reading it today. I set aside an hour. He just is basically saying, reject all of them. If God wants to speak to you through them, God can be, but will make the impression in your heart. But he just talks about the enemy of our souls, tries to do the same thing, but she'll describe it. Character of the true audition, St. Teresa. Exterior words, musical audition. Oh, that's what I get. Suso talks about that. Divine dialogues, vision, its general character. Most mystics distrust it. Oh, when you get visions. Hilton. Okay, St. John of the Cross, Madame Guyon. 3 classes of vision, intellectual, imaginary, and corporeal. Intellectual visions, its character, St. Teresa. Imaginary vision, it exists in all poets. Its 2 forms, symbolic visions, Suso, Dante, St. Matilde of Hackborn. Oh, okay, a different one. Visions of divine personality, St. Teresa. Vision of Christ. Its transcendental nature. Active imaginary visions, their character. The mystic marriage of St. Catherine. Transverberation of St. Teresa of Avila. Automatic writing in the mystics, St. Catherine of Siena, Blake, St. Teresa, Madame Guyon, and Jacob Boehme. Conclusion. Okay, so now we're voices and visions. I had no idea I was going to be reading this today. I just got a feeling. Oh, wow. Those are beautiful. Yeah, I just got a feeling to go, and I had an hour before sunset, so I started hiking out here and grabbed my book. Okay, we now come to that eternal battleground. The detailed, let's see if we can turn towards the flowers. Oops. I like something moving. It feels like animation of the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit. Like Holy Spirit, we'll do that. Okay, we now come to that eternal battleground, the detailed discussion of those abnormal psychic phenomena which appear so persistently in the history of mystics. I feel like inviting someone to come join us. You guys are all here, so welcome. Persistently in the history of the mystics. That is to say, visions, auditions, automatic script, and those dramatic dialogues between the self and some other factor, the soul, love, reason, or the voice of God. All of those are in capital, right? Capital letters. The soul, love, reason, or the voice of God, which seems sometimes to arise from an exalted and uncontrolled imaginative power, sometimes to attain the proportions of auditory hallucination. Here, moderate persons are like to be hewn in pieces between the 2 great powers who have long disputed this territory and agreeably occupied their leisure by tearing out each other's hair. On the one hand, we have the strangely named rationalists, right? Why are they called rational? They're irrational in their rationality. I know she's going to say that. I haven't read this. Who feel that they have settled the matter once for all by calling attention to the undoubted parallels which exist between the bodily symptoms of acute spiritual stress and the bodily symptoms of certain forms of disease. These considerations, reinforced by those comfortable words, autosuggestion and psychosensorial hallucination, which do but reintroduce mystery in another and less attractive form, enable them to pity rather than blame the peculiarities of the great contemplatives. Modern French psychology, in particular, revels in this sort of thing, and would, if it had its way, fill the wards of the Salpêtrière with patients from the Roman calendar. Oh, that's sad, but I think she's talking about like an insane asylum. They would put half the saints in there, you know. I mean, she told us earlier in the book how Saint Francis was this wild young man. And he got this intuition, it's this impulse to go into this church, and he saw Jesus speaking to him, like it moved on the crucifix. Christ did, the mouth moved, you know. And so, but his whole life changed after that. He became St. Francis of Assisi and talked to animals and stuff, you know. Tamed that wolf that we heard last time about. We heard that in this book, right? I think we did. I don't know, I read lots of different things in the in-between sometimes. Modern French psychology, in particular, revels in this sort of thing. Oh yeah, and would, if it had its way, fill the wards of the Salpêtrière, I can't do my French very well, with patients from the Roman calendar. The modern interpreter, says Rufus Jones, finds in the stigmata of St. Francis of Assisi a point of weakness rather than a point of strength. Not the marks of a saint, but the marks of emotional and physical abnormality. Like he wanted to make that happen, you know what I mean? This is a very moderate statement of the rational, she put quotes, rational position, by a writer who is in actual sympathy with certain aspects of mysticism. Yet it may well be doubted whether that flame of living love, which could for one dazzling instant weld body and soul in one, was really a point of weakness in a saint, whether Blake was quite as mad as some of his interpreters, or the powers of St. Paul and St. Teresa are fully explained on a basis of epilepsy or hysteria, whether finally it is as scientific as it looks to lump together all visions and voices, from Wandering Willie to the Apocalypse of St. John, as examples of unhealthy cerebral activity. You know, they do this with Van Gogh. I know they do. But anyway, I won't go into that. As against all of this, the intransigent votaries of the supernatural seem determined to play into the hands of their foes. They pen themselves, for no apparent reason, to the objective reality and absolute value of visions, voices, and other experiences, which would be classed in any other department of life as the harmless results of a vivid imagination, and claim as examples of miraculous interference with, quote, natural law, psychic phenomena, which may well be the normal, if rare, methods by which a certain type of intuitive genius actualizes its perception of the spiritual world. Materialistic piety of this kind, which would have us believe that St. Anthony of Padua really held the infant Christ in his arms, and that the Holy Ghost truly told the Blessed Angela of Foligno that he loved her better than any other woman in the Vale of Spoleto, and she knew him more intimately than the apostles themselves, is the best friend of the rationalists possess. It turns dreams into miracles and miracles into dreams, and drags down the symbolic visions of genius to the level of pious hallucination. Even the profound and beautiful significance of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque's vision of the Sacred Heart, a pictured expression of one of the deepest intuitions of the human soul, caught up to the contemplation of God's love, has been impaired by the grossly material interpretation which it has been forced to bear. So too, the beautiful reveries of Suso, the divine visitations experienced by Francis, Catherine, Teresa, and countless other saints, have been degraded in the course of their supposed elevation to the sphere called supernatural, a process as fatal to their truth and beauty as the stuffing of birds, right? When that bird's right there. I hope you saw it on the camera. Yeah. All this, too, is done in defiance of the great mystics themselves, who are unanimous in warning their disciples against the danger of attributing too much importance to visions and voices, or accepting them at their face value as messages from God. You know, she's going to talk about discernment. Nevertheless, these visions and voices are such frequent accompaniments of the mystic life that they cannot be left on one side. The messengers of the invisible world knock persistently at the doors of the senses, and not only at those which we refer to hearing and to sight. In other words, supersensual intuitions, the contact between man's finite being and the infinite being in which it is immersed, can express themselves by means of almost any kind of sensory automatism. Strange, sweet perfumes and tastes, physical sensations of touch. Inward fires are reported over and over again in connection with such spiritual adventures. Those symbols under which the mystic tends to approach the absolute easily become objectivized and present themselves to the consciousness as parts of experience rather than as modes of interpretation. The knowledge which is obtained in such an approach is wholly transcendental. It consists in an undifferentiated act of the whole consciousness, in which, under the spur of love, life draws near to life. Thought, feeling, vision, touch, all are hopelessly inadequate to it, yet all perhaps may hint at that intense perception of which they are the scattered parts. Quote, and we shall endlessly be all had in God. Oh, I love that. Okay, this is from Julian of Norwich. St. Julian of Norwich. And we shall endlessly be all had in God, says Julian of this supreme experience, him verily seeing and fully feeling, him spiritually hearing, and him delectably smelling and sweetly swallowing. I heard this Native American describe it like, you know, if you were laying on the ground and a bunny rabbit crawled across your belly, would you not know? Would you not notice? That's how much God notices. We're in Godness. You know, we're in God's dream is what they say. How they know one way to say it. We're in the mind womb of God right now. So he knows all of it. He is beyond he. God is the I am that I am. Divine love. Anyway, all those so-called hallucinations of the senses which appear in the history of mysticism must then be considered soberly, frankly, and without prejudice in the course of our inquiry into the psychology of man's quest of the real. The question for their critics must really be this: do these automatisms, which appear so persistently as part of the contemplative life, represent merely the dreams and fancies, the old digested percepts of the visionary, objectivized and presented to his surface mind in a concrete form, or are they ever representations, symbolic, if you like, of some fact, force, or personality, some triumphing spiritual power, external to himself? Is the vision only a pictured thought, or is it the violent effort of the self to translate something impressed upon its deeper being, some message received from without, which projects this sharp image and places it before the consciousness? The answer seems to be that the voice or vision may be either of these two things, that the pathology and religion have both been over-hasty in their eagerness to snatch at these phenomena for their own purposes. Many, perhaps most voices do but give the answer which the subject has already suggested to itself. Many, perhaps most visions are the picturings of dreams and desires. Some are morbid hallucinations, some even symptoms of insanity. All probably borrow their shape as apart from their content from suggestions already present in the mind of the seer. You know, perhaps. But I don't think like Ezekiel saw, you know, wheels within wheels, and like had seen it. Maybe he'd seen wheels before on chariots, but like how he had to describe that. I won't go into that. But anyway, there are some experienced by minds of great power and richness which are crucial for those who have them. These bring wisdom to the simple and ignorant, sudden calm to those who are tormented by doubts. They flood the personality with new light, accompany conversion or the passage from one spiritual state to another, arrive at moments of indecision, bringing with them authoritative commands or counsels opposed to the inclination of self, confer a convinced knowledge of some department of the spiritual life before unknown. Like Einstein says that you can't solve a problem with the same energy that created the problem. And so, something higher comes to these people in these moments of indecisions where they're like, we're backed up against the wall, you know, and you finally just let go, and you in that surrendered state, and you're asking divine love, you're asking God to help, then the answers come from a higher plane. She'll talk about that. Such, she just said, I just saw higher planes. Such visions, it is clear, belong to another and higher plane of experience from the radiant appearances of Our Lady, you know, Mother Mary, the piteous exhibitions of the sufferings of Christ, which swarm in the lives of the saints, and contain no feature which is not traceable to the subject's religious enthusiasms or previous knowledge. These, in the apt phrase of God for now, are but images floating on the moving deeps of feeling. not symbolic messages from another plane of consciousness. Some test, then, must be applied, some basis of classification discovered, if we are to distinguish the visions and voices which seem to be symptoms of real transcendental activity from those which are only due to imagination raised to the nth power, to intense reverie, or even to psychic illness. That test, I think, must be the same as that which we shall find useful for ecstatic states, namely their life-enhancing quality. Hold on, there's a bug over here. All right. Those visions and voices, I'm usually way off the trail, but not tonight because it's all foggy. Those visions and voices which are the media by which the seeing self truly approaches the absolute. You know, like the canvas is the media you use if you're a painter, and she's not talking about the kind of media we use these days, but those visions and voices which are the media by which the seeing self truly approaches the absolute, which are the formula under which ontological perceptions are expressed, are found by that self to be sources of helpful energy, charity, and courage. You know, the word for agape love is charity in the Bible. I'm not sure if she's using it the same. She probably knows Greek too. Anyway, they infuse something new in the way of strength, knowledge, direction, and leave it physically, mentally, or spiritually better than they found it. Those which do not owe their inception to the contact of the soul with external reality, in theological language, do not, quote, come from God, do not have this effect. At best, they are but the results of the self's turning over of her treasures. At worst, they are the dreams, sometimes the diseased dreams, of an active, rich, but imperfectly controlled subliminal consciousness. Since it is implicit in the makeup of the mystical temperament that the subliminal consciousness should be active and rich, and since the unstable nervous organization which goes with it renders it liable to illness and exhaustion, it is not surprising to find that the visionary experience, even of the greatest mystics, is mixed in type. One automatism has established itself in a person. It may as easily become the expression of folly as of wisdom. In the moments when inspiration has ebbed, old forgotten superstitions may take its place. When Julian of Norwich in her illness saw the, quote, horrible showing of the fiend, red with black freckles, which clutched at her throat with its paws, when St. Teresa was visited by Satan, who left a smell of brimstone behind, or when she saw him sitting on the top of her breviary and dislodged him by the use of holy water, it is surely reasonable to allow that we are in the presence of visions which tend towards the psychopathic type, and which are expressive of little else but an exhaustion and temporary loss of balance on the subject's part, which allowed her intense consciousness of the reality of evil to assume a concrete form. I wonder what she puts in this, what Evelyn Underhill puts in the revised. I have the revised edition in the trunk of my car, which is far from here, but I wonder, it's like the 9th revision, what she says in that place. But anyway, because we allow this, however, it does not follow that all the visionary experiences of such a subject is morbid, any more than Oedipus Tyrrhenus invalidates Prometheus Unbound, or occasional attacks of dyspepsia invalidate the whole process of nutrition. The perceptive power and creative genius of mystics, as of other great artists, sometimes goes astray. That visions or voices should sometimes be the means by which the soul consciously assimilates the nourishment it needs, is conceivable. It is surely also conceivable that by the same means it may present to the surface intelligence things which are productive of unhealthy rather than of healthy reactions. If we would cease once for all to regard visions and voices as objective, and be content to see in them forms of symbolic expression, ways in which the subconscious activity of the spiritual self reaches the surface mind, many of the disharmonies noticeable in visionary experience, which have teased the devout and delighted the agnostic, would fade away. Visionary experience is, or at least may be, the outward sign of a real experience. It is a picture which the mind constructs, it is true, from raw materials already at its disposal, as the artist constructs his picture with canvas and paint. But as the artist paints and canvas picture is the fruit, not merely of contact between brush and canvas, but also of a more vital contact between his creative genius and visible beauty or truth. So too we may see in vision where the subject is a mystic, the fruit of a more mysterious contact between the visionary and a transcendental beauty or truth. Such a vision, that is to say, is the accident, quote accident, which represents and enshrines a substance unseen, the paint and canvas picture, which tries to show the surface consciousness, that ineffable sight, that ecstatic perception of good or evil, for neither extreme has the monopoly, to which the deeper, more real soul has attained. The transcendental powers take for this purpose such material as they can find amongst the hoarded beliefs and memories of the self. Hence, Pontius sees the celestial Venus, Suso the eternal wisdom, Saint Teresa the humanity of Christ, Blake the strange personages of his prophetic books, others more obviously symbolic objects. Saint Ignatius Loyola, for instance, in a moment of lucidity, saw the most holy Trinity, as it were, under the likeness of a triple plectrum, or of 3 spinet keys. And on another occasion, the Blessed Virgin, without distinction of members. Oh, so he saw the Trinity as the Blessed Virgin, without the distinction between them. Visions and voices, then, may stand in the same relation to the mystic as pictures, poems, and musical compositions stand to the great painter, poet, musician. They are the artistic expressions and the creative results, A, of thought, B, of intuition, and C, of direct perception. All would be ready to acknowledge how conventional and imperfect of necessity are those transcripts of perceived goodness, truth, and beauty, which we owe to artistic genius. How unequal is their relation to reality. But this is not to say that they are valueless or absurd. So too with the mystic, whose proceedings in this respect are closer to those of the artist than is generally acknowledged. In both types, there is a constant and involuntary work of translation going on, by which reality is interpreted in the terms of appearance. In both, a peculiar mental makeup conduces to this result. And no one on the trail can be seen, so that's good. It just looks like a child. Anyway. In these subjects, the state of reverie tends easily to a visionary character. Thought becomes pictorial, auditory, or rhythmic, as the case may be. Concrete images, balanced harmonies, elusive yet recognizable, surge up mysteriously without the intervention of the will, and place themselves before the mind. Thus the painter really sees his unpainted picture. The novelist hears the conversation of his characters. The poet receives his cadences ready-made. The musician listens to a veritable music which pipes to the spirit ditties of no tone. In the mystic, the same type of activity constantly appears. Profound meditation takes a pictorial form. Apt symbols, which suggest themselves to his imagination, become objectivized. The message that he longs for is heard within his mind. Hence those interior voices and imaginary visions, which are sometimes, as in Suso, indistinguishable from the ordinary accompaniments of intense artistic activity, were, however, artistic automatisms. Spend themselves upon the artist's work, mystical automatisms, in their highest form. Have to do with transformation of personality, which is the essence of the mystic life. They are media by which the self measures its approximation to the absolute and is guided on its upward way. Moreover, they are coordinated. The voice and vision go together, corroborate one another, and work out right in relation to the life of the self. Thus St. Catherine of Siena's mystic marriage was prefaced by a voice which ever said, in answers to her prayers, "I will espouse thee to myself in faith." And the vision in which that union was consummated was again initiated by a voice saying, "I will this day celebrate solemnly with thee the feast of betrothal of thy soul. And even as I promise, I will espouse thee to myself in faith." Such automatisms as these, says Delacroix, are by no means scattered and incoherent. They are systematic and progressive. They are governed by an interior aim. They have, above all, a teleological character. They indicate the continuous intervention of a being at once wiser and more powerful than the ordinary character and reason. They are the realization in visual and auditory images of a secret and permanent personality of a superior type to the conscious personality. They are its voice, the exterior projection of its life. They translate to the conscious personality the suggestions of the subconscious, and they permit the continuous penetration of the conscious personality by these deeper activities. They establish a communication between these two planes of existence, and by their imperative nature, they tend to make the inferior subordinate to the superior. So your personality, some people call it your present-day personality. I'm going to put my sweatshirt on while all these people are around real quick. And so it's like your present-day personality gets put down and said to be less than. I mean, the vision takes precedence over that, right? 1 second. Sorry if that's making a noise. When she said teleological, all right, that's the Greek word for telos. For telos, that is when Jesus said on Maundy Thursday, which means a new mandate I give unto thee. Mandate, and commandment is the word telos is in it, intele, in telos, and so telos is the end, aim, or goal. Plato talks about it. Aristotle talks about it. I just wrote a lot about it in the description of one of my videos, but I can't remember my videos, which one it was. Sorry, if I watch this, I'll try to put it in one of the cards up here. 32. Okay, I'll try to remember around 33. Anyway, so, all right, let's go back to the book. Tell us, when Jesus says, join me or follow me, it's kind of like a new aim I give to you, instead of, it's like, because the law of love holds all commands. All the commands are in it. He's like, join me on this telos, this aim, join me in going for this high aim. It's how I can teach in all my videos about the high consciousness that Jesus is always teaching us about, because he's walk in this telos, in the highest telos there is, higher than your personality. Teleological. That's the study of the telos. Anyway, of ends. You can look it up on Wikipedia. That's where I got my quotes from. But they always change that thing, so watch out. Anyway, audition. The simplest and, as a rule, the first way in which automatism shows itself is in voices or auditions. The mystic becomes aware of something, with a capital S, which speaks to him either clearly or implicitly, giving him abrupt and unexpected orders and encouragements. Now, she uses the word him. I talked about this many videos again. Oftentimes when she talks about the soul, she uses her. This is just how they spoke in 1910. So I was changing it to him and her before, but sometimes I don't now. Just she's talking about mankind and just using the word man. But anyway, the mystic becomes aware of something which speaks to him either clearly or implicitly, giving him abrupt and unexpected orders and encouragements. The reality of his contact with the divine life is thus brought home to him by a device with which the accidents of human intercourse have made him familiar. His subliminal mind, soaked as it is now in the transcendental perceptions, at one with the absolute, irradiated by the uncreated light, but still dissociated from the surface intelligence, which is slowly educating, seems to that surface self like another being. Hence, its messages are often heard literally as voices, either one, the immediate or inarticulate voice, which the auditive mystic knows so well but finds it so difficult to define. Two, the distinct interior voice, perfectly articulate but recognized as speaking only within the mind. Three, by a hallucination which we have all experienced in dream or reverie, the exterior voice which appears to be speaking externally to the subject and to be heard by the outward ear. This, the traditional classification of auditions, also answers exactly to the three main types of vision: one, intellectual; two, imaginary; or three, corporeal, bodily. Let me think what I was going to say. Voices. Okay. Maybe it'll come back. Immediate. Of these three kinds of voices, I'll just continue. The mystics are unanimous in their opinion that the first and least marvelous is by far, that's what I was going to say, is Jesus said, their angels see the face of God in heaven. So he's indicating, most people say that we all have a guardian angel. And so, and the word angel, people don't even realize these things, right? The word angel means messenger. So, why would it be weird that a message would come through our own guardian angel that's connected to divine love? And the Holy Spirit can speak to us. Jesus said the Holy Spirit would remind us of all things that Christ taught us, bring us into all truth. But I know St. John of the Cross, so often he just says, don't long for these things. Just don't, like when King David said, if you get rich, don't set your heart on those riches. As soon as you set your heart on them, then they become like thorns. Jesus called riches as thorns. That's what I was reading today in St. John of the Cross. I was writing it in my journal. Because they ensnare you because of the weakness of our nature. We can get caught up in them, And so, if you're rich in your own personality as well, and you're in your own achievements and rank and all these things, these can be thorns and cause you to fail to glorify God, he says. And when you fail God, that's a sin, hamartia, you're missing the mark, You're missing the point. You're missing the end for which you were created. That's how Metropolitan Callistos Ware defined it. He defined it so well. I don't know which video that is. I love it though so much. Anyway. Of these three kinds of voices, the mystics are unanimous in their opinion that the first and least marvelous is by far the best, belonging indeed to an entirely different plane of consciousness from the uttered interior or exterior word. Distinct interior words, says Madame Guyon, are very subject to illusion. The devil is responsible for many of them, and when they come from our good angel, oh look, I didn't know she was going to say that. For God himself never speaks in this manner. They do not always mean that which they say, and one seldom finds that what is thus predicted comes to pass. For when God causes words of this kind to be brought to us by his angels, he understands them in his way, and we take them in ours. And this is it which deceives us. The word which God speaks without intermediary is no other than his word, logos, in the soul. A substantial word, silent and inarticulate, a vivifying and energizing word, as has been said, dixit et facta sunt. I don't know Latin. I did Greek. I want to get off this rock I'm sitting on. Hold on. Okay. I could lower it a little bit. I know it was just like my head floating for a little bit. There. Okay. sometimes she translates these, but always, if you know Latin or Italian or French or whatever she's saying, I usually show it. You can, is this right here? Write it in the, my sparkling nail polish fell off. I get that to remind us how mystic we are. I won't go into it. It was Lent. I was not getting my nail. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. This word is never for a moment dumb nor sterile. This word is heard ceaselessly in the center of the soul, which is disposed thereto and returns to its principle, as pure as when it came forth therefrom. Oh, I just interrupted something so beautiful. Okay, the word which God speaks without intermediary is no other than his word, logos, in the soul, a substantial word, silent and inarticulate, a vivifying and energizing word. As has been said, the Latin thing, this word is never for a moment dumb nor sterile. This word is heard ceaselessly in the center of the soul, which is disposed thereto and returns to its principle, as pure as when it came forth therefrom. Let thy good spirit enter my heart, and there be heard without utterance and without the sound of words. Speak all truth, says a prayer attributed to Saint Ambrose. Let thy good spirit enter my heart, and there be heard without utterance and without the sound of words. Speak all truth. Oh, I have a quote from Rumi on one of my journals. I'm doing a special project in that journal. That's why I remember it too. But he says on the cover, it's the Sufi poet Rumi. He says, "There is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen to that. Listen to it." That's the same thing. Well, I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but anyway, I ask God about that all the time, so I don't know. I keep it like this. A lot of these things you have to, it's just like riches. If they come to you, keep your hand open because they can leave. If you don't know about that, read Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy. Read that over and over again. It was written in like 480 AD. And they said it was second in popularity to the Bible, as most books sold. That's what I read. But I love it. Lady Wisdom comes to Boethius and teaches him about fame and fortune and people going against you and people, you know, it's just, Lauryn Hill sings about it. She says, "You stupid star, they'll hail you and nail you no matter who you are." Something like that. I gave my friend Elliot Smith a copy of The Consolation of Philosophy. I gave him very few books. He asked for my dissertation, but anyway, I gave him a copy of that. I went and copied it for him in between preparing for a show and then after the show. Anyway, that was in Montreal. That's where I was writing my... Anyway, I won't go into it. Anyway. Let thy good spirit enter my heart, and there be heard without utterance and without the sound of words. Speak all truth, says a prayer attributed to St. Ambrose. Exactly describing the function of these unmediated or intellectual words. Dynamic messages of this kind, imperative intuitions, which elude the containing formula of speech, are invariably attributed by the self to the direct action of the divine. They bring with them an unquestionable authority, an infusion of new knowledge or new life. They are, in fact, not messages, but actual invasions from beyond the threshold, sudden emergences of that hidden child of the Absolute, which mystics call the spark of the soul, and of which it has been truly said, abyssum invocat. Something maybe from the dark, from the darkness of the dark, something's invoked. I'm just guessing that, right? Distinct interior words, on the other hand, are not invariably authoritative for those who hear them, though St. Teresa, whose brilliant self-criticisms are our best source of information on mystical auditions, gives them a higher place in spiritual experience than Madame Guyon's devotion to naked orison will permit her to do so. She too considers that, though they come from God, they are not due to direct contact with the divine, but that they may be distinguished from those words which result merely from voluntary activity of the imagination, as much by the sense of certitude, peace, and interior joy which they produce, as by the fact that they force themselves upon the attention in spite of its resistance, and bring with them knowledge which was not previously within the field of consciousness. That is to say, they are really automatic presentations of the result of mystic intuition, not mere rearrangements of the constituents of thought, of whatever is in your subconscious. You actually get new understanding. It's like, anyway, she'll explain it. Hence they bring to the surface self new material, have an actual value for life. I have an example from a survival class I went to. They taught us to go out, and they said attribute all of it to your imagination until you come back and you verify. Go out and ask the tree, what are your medicinal properties? And then take your notebook and write them all down. And there was a person that said, this is this kind of tree. And, or I don't know if they said it, but yeah, the person went with us on the nature walk. And we just wrote it down. And all these people got visions of like taking the pine needles and boiling them and the sap and doing all these things. And we wrote them down in our journals and came back. And then the whiteboard was full of all of the medicinal properties of each of the different trees. And it was like all the same. People had no idea before, and then it was there. But there's a verse in the Book of Wisdom that St. John of the Cross was talking about that says, I will reveal to you all of the uses of the herbs and plants and blah, 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 all these things. Not to every person, no, but the band Steel Pulse quotes, I think they quote a psalm because it's in the song, Chant a Psalm a Day. To the righteous will be revealed the secrets of the scripture. To the 3 holy children. They gave me permission. I mean, I had to pay them, but I'm glad to. I did a video, an hour teaching on that song, on Chant a Psalm a Day, and I sang it. It's on your soul songs, but I'm not using this to promote anything. I'm just saying that's there. That's there. It's going to be really fun when people start discovering these. But you're not meant to, okay, that's just like money. I was going to say what St. John of the Cross said is like, you're not meant to start getting the dopamine highs and then trying to chase those with this. Otherwise, you're running after visions and you're more prone to create them instead of passively get them. And even if you passively get them, you have to discern, check, test the spirits. And Jesus said one indication is by their fruit you will know them. If they produce fruit of love and all the fruits of the Spirit, that is one test. But I also heard from someone that you can get visions and they'll be like 99% true, and you'll start trusting, and then they'll start leading you off, to make you look like an idiot or take you off the path because you fall into sin because you think something's a vision from God, You fall into, missing the point for which you're created, this law of love. Anyway. Those purely self-created, here we go, hence they bring to the surface self new material, have an actual value for life. Those purely self-created locutions or rearrangements of thought, which the mind self-recollected forms and fashions within itself, often difficult to distinguish from true automatic audition, are called by Philip of the Trinity, St. John of the Cross, and other mystical theologians successive words. They feel it to be of the highest importance that the contemplative should learn to distinguish such hallucinations from real transcendental perceptions presented in auditive form. I am terrified, says St. John of the Cross, with his customary blunt common sense, quote, by what passes among us in these days. Anyone who has barely begun to meditate, if he becomes conscious of these words during his self-recollection, pronounces them forthwith to be the work of God, and considering them to be so says, God has spoken to me, or I have had an answer from God. But this is not true. Such an one has only been speaking to himself. Besides, the affection and desire for these words, which men encourage, cause them to reply to themselves and then to imagine that God has spoken. These are the words of one who was at once the sanest of saints and the most penetrating of psychologists. That psychologist is the study of the psyche, which is the word soul. So that's awesome. She's calling him a psychologist, the study of the soul. I always looked at it like as such. You know, I wanted to become a pastor, but they weren't allowing women in those positions, and I didn't want to spend my whole life fighting that. So I'm like, I'll become a psychologist. It's the study of the soul anyway. Anyway, words which our modern unruly amateurs of the subconscious might well take to heart. True auditions are usually heard when the mind is in a state of deep absorption without conscious thought. That is to say, at the most favorable of all moments for contact with the transcendental world. They translate into articulate language some aspect of that ineffable apprehension of reality, which the contemplative enjoys, crystallize those clairvoyant intuitions, those prophetic hints which surge in on him so soon as he lays himself open to the influence of the suprasensible. Sometimes, however, mystical intuition takes the form of a sudden and ungovernable uprush of knowledge from the deeps of personality. Then auditions may break in upon the normal activities of the self with startling abruptness. It is in such cases that their objective and uncontrollable character is most sharply felt. However they may appear, they are, says St. Teresa, very distinctly formed, but by the bodily ear they are not heard. They are, however, much more clearly understood than if they were heard by the ear. It is impossible not to understand them, whatever resistance may offer. The words formed by the understanding affect nothing, but when our Lord speaks, it is at once word and work. Ellipsis. The human locution, i.e. the work of imagination, is as something we cannot well make out, as if we were half asleep, but the divine locution is a voice so clear that not a syllable of its utterance is lost. It may occur, too, when the understanding and the soul are so troubled and distracted that they cannot form one sentence correctly, and yet grand sentences perfectly arranged, such as the soul in its most recollected state never could have formed, are uttered, and at first word, as I have said, change it utterly. And at the first word, as I have said, change it utterly. St. Teresa's whole mystic life was governed by voices. Her active career as a foundress was guided by them. They advised her in small things as in great. Often they interfered with her plans, ran counter to her personal judgment, forbade a foundation on which she was set, or commanded one which appeared imprudent or impossible. They concerned themselves with journeys, with the purchase of houses. They warned her of coming events. She seldom resisted them, though it constantly happened that the action on which they insisted seemed the height of folly, and though they frequently involved her in hardships and difficulties, she never had cause to regret this blind reliance upon decrees which she regarded as coming direct from God, and which certainly did emanate from a life greater than her own, in touch with the transcendent levels of consciousness. So far from mere vague intuitions are the, quote, distinct interior words, which the mystic hears within his mind, that Suso is able to state that the 100 meditations on the Passion thus revealed to him were spoken in German and not in Latin. St. Teresa's own auditions were all of this interior kind, some distinct and some substantial, or inarticulate, as her corresponding visions were nearly all of the intellectual or imaginary sort. That is to say, she was not subject to sensible hallucination. Often, however, the boundary is overpassed, and the locution seems to be heard by the mystic's outward ear, as in the case of those voices which guided the destinies of the blessed Joan of Arc, or the figure upon the cross which spoke to St. Francis of Assisi, which I had mentioned, right? Hi, Al. We then have the third form, exterior words, which the mystics for the most part regard with suspicion and dislike. Sometimes audition assumes a musical rather than a verbal character, a form of perception which probably corresponds to the temperamental bias of the self, the ordered sweetness of divine harmony striking responsive chords in the music-loving soul. The lives of St. Francis of Assisi, St. Catherine of Siena, and Richard Rolle provide obvious instances of this, but Suso, in whom automatism assumed its richest and most varied forms, has also given in his autobiography some characteristic examples. Quote, "One day, ellipsis, whilst the servitor was still at rest, he heard within himself a gracious melody by which his heart was greatly moved. And at the moment of the rising of the morning star, a deep, sweet voice sang within him these words, Stella Maria, Maris, Hodie processit ad ortum. That is to say, yes, she's translating for us, Mary, star of the sea, is risen today." I thought that was sea, but that's awesome, ad ortum. And this song, which he heard, was so spiritual and so sweet that his soul was transported by it, and he too began to sing joyously. And one day, it was in carnival time, the servitor had continued his prayers until the moment when the bugle of the watch announced the dawn. Therefore he said to himself, "Rest for an instant before you salute the shining morning star." And whilst that his senses were at rest, behold, angelic spirits began to sing, "The fair respond, Illuminary, illuminary Jerusalem." And this song was echoed with a marvelous sweetness in the deeps of his soul. And when the angels had sung for some time, his soul overflowed with joy, and his feeble body, being unable to support such happiness, burning tears escaped from his eyes. Closely connected on the one hand with the phenomena of automatic words, on the other with those of prophecy and inspiration, is the prevalence in mystical literature of revelations which take the form of dialogue, of intimate colloquies between divine reality and the soul. The revelations of Julian of Norwich and St. Catherine of Siena, and many of those of Blessed Angela of Foligno, appear to have been received by them in this way. We seem, as we read them, to be present at the outpourings of the divine mind, snatching at some form of its words on its way through the human consciousness. We feel on the one hand a oneness with the Absolute, on the part of the mystic, which has made her really, for the time being, the voice of God, whilst on the other we recognize in her the persistence of the individual, exalted but not yet wholly absorbed in the divine, whose questions here and there break in upon the revelation which is mediated to it by its deeper mind. Duologues of this sort are reported with every appearance of realism and good faith by Suso, Toller, Mathilde of Magdeburg, for sure, that's her whole book is this, Angela of Foligno, St. Teresa, and countless other mystics. The third book of the Imitation of Christ contains some conspicuously beautiful examples, which may or may not be due to literary artifice. The self, wholly obsessed by the intimate sense of divine companionship, receives its messages in the form of distinct interior words, as of an alien voice speaking within the mind with such an accent of validity and spontaneity as to leave no room for doubt as to its character. Often, as in Julian's revelations, the discourses of the divine voice, its replies to the eager questions of the self, are illustrated by imaginary visions. Since these dialogues are, on the whole, more commonly experienced in the illuminated than the unitive part of the mystic way, that self, retaining a clear consciousness of its own separateness and recognizing the voice as personal and distinct from its own soul, naturally enters into a communion which has an almost conversational character, replies to questions, or asks others in its turn. And in this dramatic style, the content of its intuitions is gradually expressed. We have then an extreme form of that dissociation which we all experience in a slight degree when we argue with ourselves, you know. Where did that thought come from? And I don't want to do that, but there's all these different I's that present themselves. I talk about that in my book, The New Man. Not my book, the book I read on YouTube by Dr. Maurice Nicole. But in this case, one of the speakers is become the instrument of a power other than itself, and communicates to the mind new wisdom and new life. The peculiar rhythmical language of genuine mystic dialogue of this kind, for often enough, as in Suso's Book of the Eternal Wisdom, it is deliberately adopted as a literary device, as an indication of its automatic character. Expression, once it is divorced from the critical action of the surface intelligence, always tends to assume a dithyrambic form. Di is two, so measure and color, exaltation of language, here take a more important place than the analytic intellect will generally permit. This feature is easily observable in prophecy and in automatic writing. It forms an interesting link with poetry, which, insofar as it is genuine and spontaneous, is largely the result of subliminal activity, poetry, music making. I'm just going to finish this paragraph. Life, which eludes language, can yet, we know not why, be communicated by rhythm, and the mystic fact is above all else the communication of a greater life, with a capital L. Hence, we must not take it amiss if the voice of the Absolute, as translated to us by those mystics who are alone capable of hearing it, often seems to adopt the grand manner. Okay, the next part is vision. Yes, I love this. I'm so glad I got this opportunity. It's such a joy to be able to share this with the 1 or 100 or more people that come across this, I love not keeping these kinds of things to myself, right? I wish you so much love. Make sure to like this if you got this far, and like the other ones at the beginning then, because I forgot to say that, and comment and share and all that stuff, because then it pushes the algorithm out so more people will get it that are meant to get it. But Divine Love's in charge of that, so I try to hold my hands like that. All right, I wish you so much love. Good night, or good day.